أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم من حمزه ونفخه ونفسه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. First, an error here. Obviously, there is no Surah Al-Quran to explain. The purpose was Surah Al-Rehman. I cannot edit it at this point in time. I shall do it subsequently, but orally I'm mentioning to you that actually it's Surah Al-Rahman explained is the title. In this part one, we will barely touch the Surah Al-Quran because there is a preamble that I'd like to go through, which is as simple as I could do it, but since it's a scholar whose work I am trying to put in front of you, even the most easy way to do it, it still sounds kind of scholarly, let's put it this way. So a minute of introduction of Professor Muhammad A.S. Abdul Halim. Egyptian, born in 1930. He is now 95 years old. He got his, of course, he became Hafiz at a very early age in his childhood, got his early education, that is the university education at Al-Azhar. And he did his PhD in, I believe it was Islamic Studies at Oxford University, no, University of Cambridge. He has lectured at the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies, which is a 110-year-old institution known the world over as the Institute for Oriental and African Studies. He started teaching there in 1971 when he was, say, 41 years old. And if I'm not mistaken, he taught there at least 45 years, primarily Quranic Arabic. The man, needless to say, is a giant of a scholar. He not only is proficient in English, in modern English, but of course he's also proficient in the Quranic Arabic. He's known the world over. The Order of British Empire was given to him in 2006 when he was maybe 75, 76. This book, Understanding the Quran, he wrote in 1999 when he was 69 years old. It's interesting that another scholar, world-renowned scholar, who could not stay in his own country, also wrote his masterpiece when he was 69. I'm referring to Fazlur Rahman, who was the chair of Islamic thought at the University of Chicago, and he wrote major themes of the Quran. I must have read it a dozen times. If that's anything to show you, it is a wonderful book. Professor Abdul Halim now, of course, is 95, but he's still considered as Professor Emeritus at the university. In 2006, at the age of 76, he wrote his magnum opus. He translated the Quran. This was the first Quran that I know of that was translated into English in the 21st century. Now we are into the 25th year of the 21st century. That Quran remains the most prominent English translation today. My wife and I must have given at least a dozen copies of that Quran to youngsters in our family. The reason being that his English is modern. It appeals to the youngsters. Of course, it appeals to everybody, but particularly it'll appeal to youngsters because he writes in today's English. And as I said, he's a linguist par excellence. And his obur on the Quran, understanding the Quran, is tremendous. In 2006, 2007, at the age of 76, 77, we're co-author of Professor Badawi, another giant of a scholar, Egyptian again. He published the Quranic Usage Arabic English Dictionary. To my mind, it is the best modern dictionary of the Quranic Arabic that is in existence right now. It should be a must-have for those people who cannot just look at the Quran and understand the words per se, but this book does that for you. So this is the fellow, Muhammad Abdul Halim, and I'm fortunate that I have read him for the last 25 years on and off, and his translation, along with Muhammad Asad's translation, remain my two sources, perhaps the two primary exclusive sources. Every once in a while, I'll also consult Yousuf Ali. So much about that. Now let's move on to, as I said, this is Surah Al-Quran explained, and I will not be speaking much of it today. The chapter in which this particular discussion appears in Professor Abdul Halim's book is titled Quran Explains Itself. So what he has done is he says Quran explains itself, and here I'm going to demonstrate to you via Surah Al-Rehman. So this is a scholar saying that, understanding what he has understood in his 70 years of life before he wrote this book. Goes without saying that I will never tire of this. I was just started reading another book by a Pakistani scholar who was raised and lives in England, Ziauddin Sardar, reading the Quran, and he goes through his lifespan as to how he has gone through the Quran. The man has written 50 books, won several awards and all that. And chapter and verse, I find that he puts this ayat as an illustration of hopelessly, once again, reminding oneself that please try to understand this book. So, a most relevant and useful approach to understanding the text, that is the discourse of the Quran, is by means of two concepts developed by Muslim scholars 1,000 years ago. And these two concepts are context and internal relationships. Now, we use the word context. I hope everybody knows the meaning of the word context. Just as one explanation of that, at the bottom, I've just taken the liberty to say context is the set of circumstances or facts that surround a particular situation. I thought that this might be appropriate when we are using the word context in this discourse, in this discussion. So the set of circumstances or the set of facts that surround a particular situation. Here we are going to be referring to a particular situation in the Quran, whatever that situation is. What are the set of circumstances or facts that surround that particular situation? That is the context, and then the Quran moves forward from that. The significance of context, a usual word the scholars use in Arabic is maqam, was recognized and formulated for the study of the Quranic text by these scholars whose work was many centuries ahead of modern linguistic thinking. Now here I'm talking about the West, about the crucial importance of context in understanding discourse, any discourse, including the discourse that is the text of the Quran. Internal relationships for the Quran were expressed by Muslim scholars by the phrase Al-Quran yufassir ba'dahu ba'd. That is, some parts of the Quran explain others. In modern linguistic terms, this concept, what we call here internal relationships, in modern linguistic terms, this concept has been called intertextuality. Now, given the dynamic and the non-linear structure of the Quranic discourse that Brother Mamdouh has often pointed out, it has been argued that the concept of internal relationships provides the most appropriate method of understanding the Quran. And so Surah Al-Rahman is examined here in the light of context and internal relationships. Professor Abdul Halim asserts that Quranic commentators who have lost sight of these two concepts and paid little attention to it have made erroneous assumptions, given sometimes inadequate explanations, arrived at conclusions that have been without foundations in many instances, and thereby contradict the spirit of the surah. Wallahu alam. This is one scholar's understanding, that because they forgot that this has to be like any other discourse, whether it's Quran or any other, has to have these two necessary key concepts underlying it. And in his defense are all those classic period or even earlier Muslim scholars who came up with this. One of the key contribution, now I'm going to move to context per se. One of the key contributions of these early scholars that I just referred to has been their recognition that context, more precisely recognition that the context of the specific situation in the Quran determines what and how the Quran speaks in that particular situation. And I'll call it, or I'll voice Professor Halim's, the utterance of the Quran. What the Quran utters and how it does so, it is determined by the context of the specific situation in the Quran that at that particular moment. In other words, the context of the specific situation, maqam, will determine the utterance of the Quran, and that utterance will conform to, that is, agree with the requirements of that particular situation. Okay. The reason when I repeat what I write here is in the hope that whoever wishes to can go back to it after it's been recorded and look at that, or ask me and I can send them a copy of this, because these words are carefully chosen by these scholars for understanding, and we cannot just comprehend or take it all in just by me reading it, albeit slowly. They have to be looked at more than once. Now, in the science of, our Muslim scholars came up with quite a few sciences in the process of understanding the Quran. So in the science, one of those sciences was the knowledge of meaning, ilm al-ma'ani. Ilm al-ma'ani of the Quran. In the science of ilm al-ma'ani of the Quran, there is the knowledge of meaning. The central issue of that particular science, knowledge of meaning, is the agreement of what and how the Quran speaks, utterance, in a particular situation to the requirements of that situation. This whole science's central issue is just that the agreement of what and how the Quran speaks in a particular situation to the requirements of that situation. In Arabic, the central issue of ilm al-mani is nicely phrased, and the Arabs here will appreciate mutabaqat al-kalam li muqtada al-hal. If I were to translate in Urdu, we all know mutabiq, appropriate. Al-kalam we know. Muqtadat al-hal, in other words, requirements of the hal, what the surat al-hal is at that time. So it's a very fine phrase which really summarizes the understanding of what is the central issue of the knowledge of meaning, the science ilm al-ma'ani. When these scholars recognized the concept of maqam, they were 1,000 years ahead of their time. Recognition of maqam as a key basis of the analysis of meaning has been arrived at only in recent times as a result of modern linguistic thinking. Very recent. It was Bronislaw Malinowski who, 100 years ago, coined the term context of the situation when his extensive research of linguistics, made him realize that understanding the language, any language, required understanding the complete cultural and situational context in which the language was used, the broader cultural setting, social relationships, and practical activities taking place. Imagine. Barely 100 years ago, the West coined the term context of the situation. These giants of your religion did so almost 1,000 years ago. Okay. This is where we were, and now we are at the behest of somebody like me reads in the West what the concept of context of the situation is from the Western scholars. It's a pity. So here are two Muslim scholars of those times further elaborating the concept and significance of maqam, that is, the context of the situation in the Quranic text. Al-Khatib al-Kazvini, a context that demands, say, definitiveness or generalization and inclusions of particular words, that context differs from the context that demands the indefinite, specific, and omission of particular words. In other words, a context which is demanding that the situation requires there the definitiveness or generalization or inclusion some particular words, it is different from the context which will demand the indefinite or the specific and even omissions of some particular words. Similarly, the context of the situation that requires conciseness differs from the context of the discourse that requires expansiveness. Remember, sometimes the Quran is very, very concentrated. Other places it expands on that concentration. Discourse with an intelligent person differs from discourse with an obtuse, that is, a less intelligent person. In other words, each word and its companion is suited to a particular context. And so, for instance, a high standard of beauty and acceptability of speech, even in Quran, will depend on its appropriateness to the situation. This is very fine. These are not my words. These are the words of a very famous scholar, and he puts these words together. Okay. And he's talking here in generality about the Quran, the Quranic text. You have to read it again and try to get an understanding in the way you can. If you cannot fully comprehend it, at least realize what is he trying to say. Quite simply, for example, the context of the situation that requires conciseness in the Quran differs from the context of the discourse that requires expansiveness. And so the words are carefully chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those two different contexts. Here is another one, Abu Ishaq al-Shatibi, his recent scholar. The science of ma'ani, meaning, and bayan in very simple, factual and figurative expression, by which the ijaz of the Quran, ijaz means inimitability. Inimitability means incapable of being imitated. So when we say ijaz of the Quran, we are trying to say this is what is in the Quran which makes it inimitable, that it cannot be imitated. So the science of mani and bayan, which the ijaz of the Quran is recognized, by which the ijaz of the Quran is recognized, revolves around knowing the requirements of the situation during the discourse from the point of view of the discourse itself. What is the text saying? The discussion, is it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking, or is it asking the Prophet to say something? It also depends on the discursing. In other words, you and I. Or it may include all of those together, because the same statement can be understood in different ways in relations to two different addressees, you and I, or more. A question with one and the same form in one place can imply other meanings in other places. Likewise, an imperative, a command, does have the meaning of command in several places, but as Brother Shahzado yesterday talked with it is command, but it is also I forget now what word he used, but it was not a command. So likewise, an imperative, a command in the Quran can have also the meaning of permission. Go, I will give you this. Right? You do this, you don't this, so and so. Or impossibility. No, you will not be able to come up with another surah like this. So these are the nuances of the Quran. Okay. Any sensible person who has gone through this is going to be the first one to say, this is not an easy text. This requires struggle. We fail at this first requirement of struggling. We choose not to struggle with the Quran. And this is why I keep on putting that first side. If you do not reflect, it will not talk to you. It is that simple. So the second one, internal relationships. The other key tool in the Quranic interpretation, in English we call it exegesis, in Urdu we call it tafsir, Arabic as well. So the other key tool in the Quranic tafsir, besides the context of the situation, is the internal relationships between material in different parts of the Quran, as I said earlier, expressed by Quranic scholars as Al-Quran yufassir ba'dahu ba'da. The scholar Ibn Taymiyyah considers the interrelationships tool as the most correct method, as-sahl turuq, of exegesis, tafsir. What is given in a general way in one place is explained in detail in the other place. This is he saying. What is given briefly in one place is expanded in the other place. Many Quranic passages can only be properly understood by the explanations provided in other places in the Quran. The conciseness or expansion in one place or another depends on what the situation requires. Muqtada al-hal. So, for instance, the purpose of many stories of earlier prophets was to strengthen the prophet, peace be upon him, in the face of various forms of denial and opposition from his opponents at different times. And so the form of the story, that is, the utterance of the Quranic text, would echo a situation similar to that which the Prophet was facing, context of the situation. Mutabakat al-kalam li muqtada al-hal. In brief, the particular form of the narrative changes in accordance with the situation. All the while, all of it is true, factual, with no doubt about its being correct. This is not because you say, oh, well, it says it here, it says it, so something else there. Remember, this is the Quran. All the facts, no doubt about it being correct. But it is this and it is there for a particular reason. Yet another illustration of internal relationships of Quranic passages is seen in a feature of Quranic style, wherein a single word in one verse is expanded and clarified in another. So for instance, Surah 37, Ayat 57, were it not for the favor of my Lord, I too would have been brought. That's it says. That's with reference to Surah 34, Ayat 38. Those who will be brought to punishment. Okay, this is the cross-referencing, interrelationships, cross-referencing, footnotes. This is why if you're doing a tafsir and the footnotes come, don't go beyond the text until you've gone through those cross-references. And then those cross-references might take you to a third place, sometimes even fourth place. Go through the chain. This is where the interrelationships will come alive. This is where the text of the Quran will come alive to you. If you don't do that, say, well, what I'm reading up there is sufficient. It is not going to be. You're going to say, well, sometimes it says this, sometimes it says that. This is why those cross-references are there. This is why the footnotes are replete in the tafsir. The day of calling out, ayat 32, surah 40. It's with reference to, and the people of paradise will call out to the people of fire. Ayat 44, Surah 7. Surah Fatiha, the path of those who you have blessed. 7th ayat. With reference to those whom Allah has blessed. The Prophet, the truthful, the martyr, the righteous. Surah Nisa 69, ayat 69. More examples will be found in the discussion of Surah Al-Rehman. So in summary then, the importance of context in determining the meaning of any discourse, Quran or otherwise, has by now been established beyond doubt, insofar as the Islamic classic scholars are concerned, and endorsed by modern linguistics, which is a century old rather than a millennium old. And since the style of the Quran is self-referential, see, there was a scholar, Professor Islahi, more than 100 years ago, but he was in the 20th century alive also. He is known to have said and claimed, I don't need to refer to anything. The Quran is sufficient unto itself, okay? Since the style of the Quran is self-referential, those cross-references I'm talking about, self-referential, that is the Quran, since the Quran, it explains itself, the importance of internal relationships in understanding the text of the Quran cannot be seriously challenged. This is what the sum total of what I've said in the last 25, 26 minutes is. Context with the expression that it demands, an internal relationship, that is the intertextuality, both these focus our attention on the Quranic text itself. We have not even gone to hadith, let alone to several other references. The context with the expression that it demands and the internal relationships both focus our attention on the Quranic text itself, which most certainly must take priority over any other approach to understanding and explaining the Quran. You will hear this claim from very reasoned people who are still alive in this world, that if you truly and truly go into the so-called depths of the Quran, most of your questions will be answered as long as your belief is based on reason and faith. Faith is necessary, reasoning is necessary, but you need both. You need both to be sufficient, you know. And if you do those two, I can assure you that if not as a scholar, I will always be a student. As a student of the Quran, this will be sufficient for you. Now, underlying that faith is, this is where my intelligence stops, because I have a limited sense of perception as a human being. This is where his perception begins, okay? Where my perception was, he is there. Beyond this, ultraviolet, I cannot see. My mind cannot go beyond. This is now his domain. I.e., what I'm saying is, very quickly, your faith has to say, I believe in Al-Ghaib. And the Al-Ghaib is beyond my human sense of perception. But by God, I swear to you, your sense of perception is tremendous. Its potential is literally limitless. It all depends on how far we take our sense of level of perception to its use. And so hopefully reviewing Surah Al-Rehman, if I have time to do it over the next couple of times or whatever, in the light of context and internal relationships, one hopes will show the benefit of this approach. Now I move to a surah, and I'll just be very brief at this time, just by way of introduction. The title is Al-Rahman. The title of the surah is Al-Rahman. Most translators call the title the Merciful. Others translate it as the All-Merciful, the Beneficent, Owner of Grace, Allah Most Gracious, etc. Not just one, all of these. Those who choose the Merciful for Ar-Rahman have clearly identified the general meaning of the root word rahma, mercy. That is, mercy personified. Ar-Rahman is mercy personified. And so the scholar says, therefore, here in this instance, I shall call it the merciful. Those scholars or translators who opted for, say, the beneficent, the bounteous, the gracious, for translating Ar-Rahman here, they have identified manifestations of mercy in the root meaning. In other words, manifestations of mercy, that is, Allah's blessings that they see as listed in this surah. Now, both these have delved into it, and to their best of ability, they said, in this particular instance, I believe Ar-Rahman, which has many, many meanings, fits this one here. Is one superior to the other? I'm not the judge of that, nor should any one of us be. So here is, for example, M.A.S. Abdul Halim, author of the discourse on Surah Al-Rahman, opts to adapt the merciful as a translation of Ar-Rahman in this instance, in the sense of the one who extends his mercy in the form of blessings that have been listed in the verses of the surah. Since he says that you, as all of us know, the blessings upon Allah's creation are listed in this, and those blessings are nothing but manifestations of his mercy. So in this instance, he chooses to translate Ar-Rahman as the merciful. He does not deny that Ar-Rahman can also mean the others. He simply says in this particular thing, this. So in other words, Abdul Halim's choice of this meaning, the merciful for Ar-Rahman, he claims is borne out by the context of Surah Al-Rahman. Now I'll preempt here something. The context of Surah Al-Rahman, as he points out later on, it may become clear, he says is the first ayat itself. Ar-Rahman is the context of Ar-Rahman, the surah. At some other point, he goes a little bit further. He says, the context of this surah is Ar-Rahman and his blessings bestowed upon his creation, the ones that are listed. That is the context. Keep that in mind. Ar-Rahman and his blessings is the context of this Quran. Even goes to restricted and says, indeed, Ar-Rahman, the first ayat, is the context of this Quran, of this surah. Okay? The surah has 78 verses, as we all know, beginning in ayat 1 with the name Ar-Rahman and ending in ayat 78 with blessed is the name of your Lord, sustainer, the Lord of glory and bestower of honor. Now, these glory and bestower of honor will come in various translations, and I'll dwell on that in the next one. The surah may be seen as comprising three distinct sections. Section 1, Allah's blessings in this world. In this world, which obviously then means for his creation on this earth. The refrain, I call it the refrain, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, appears in this 8 times. Ayat 1 through approximately ayat 30 deal with the blessings in this world. Section 1. In it, ayat 13, for the first time, challenges the men and jinn, the addresses in this Quran, for the first time in the surah. Which then of your Lord's blessing do you both, tukaziban is dual, both deny? This challenge, this refrain is repeated afterwards, as we all know, throughout the surah. Section 2, punishment on Judgment Day. The refrain appears 7 times here. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ appears here 7 times. Ayat 31 through 45. Here's another blessing. The section on punishment is the shortest one. 31 through 45 contain a challenge for men and jinn to escape Allah's judgment. Here, in this section, which is called the punishment on Judgment Day, of course, contains a challenge, not the refrain فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, but here is a challenge for men and jinn to escape Allah's judgment. I challenge you whether you can escape my judgment on Judgment Day. However, the guilty shall not escape the punishment whose existence they had repeatedly denied while they were in this world. We're not going to talk and refer to the jinn concept. The jinn concept is either you understand or you believe in and leave it be. Our purpose here is to know about us. What have we wrought and what have we brought into our own lives here? Okay. But Allahu Alam, he chooses to address both men and jinn to Kazziban and repeats 31 times, both to humankind as well as to jinn. Of these blessings, which of these will you both deny? Okay. So the guilty shall not escape the punishment whose existence they had repeatedly denied. Now notice, this is the section on punishment, and it is now on Judgment Day. The blessings that you had are all gone because the earth is no more. You are there on Judgment Day. And this section is talking about punishment. And then you ask, why is there this refrain 7 times? In this one, now these are going to be punished. They are being told about what they will get, this and that. Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming up with this refrain? It's like rhetorically, you denied those blessings of yours over there. Remember what I used to tell you? Which of these blessings are you going to deny? In other words, it's like a rhetorical telling him, don't you remember? 7 times in these 15 ayats, 7 ayats are just for that. Look how rhetorically he's saying that. You are escaping, you say you are going to escape all this. You're going to ignore what I'm telling you in section 1, which was about 8 times. So he repeats it again 7 times. This is the style of the Quran. This is how Quran chooses to speak to us. This is how Quran says, when you will be standing, you and I will be standing, and those of us who will be the unfortunate ones, the punishment is going to be described here. And 7 times rhetorically it says, remember I used to tell you this? And he said, no, I'm going to escape this. Well, here you are. This is the Judgment Day. So this is section 2. Section 3 is the rewards, 46 through 77. Almost 30 ayah. Okay. 16 times the refrain comes in. Okay. So you are being rewarded. And I kept on telling you, which of these you are going to deny? And you kept on saying, no, we are not going to deny. And he reminds them of their goodness, these fortunate people's goodness, rhetorically here, but in a nice, pleasant way, positive way, reinforcing what they did in this world, how they accepted those blessings that were coming from him to us, and how they made positive use of those blessings. He's now talking about rewards, and he keeps reminding them again and again, reinforcing their good fortune of the good things that they did while they were on this earth for that passage of time, which, as I discussed in my previous presentation of Surah Al-Asr, where in their Asr, in his Asr, in my Asr, my time, my flight of passage in this world, I kept his name squarely in the center of my time. I forget most of the time, but those are the fortunate ones who in this flight of passage, limited time in this world, in their Asr, here in this world, kept His name in their consciousness, the height of taqwa. Okay? So he reminds them, and they kind of puff up with good pride, finally. As stated earlier, the surah ends with ayat 78. Blessed is the name of your sustainer, the Lord of glory, the bestower of honor. Now, 3 ayat fuse the whole of Surah Al-Rehman into one solid unity. This is a very good observation. It's not mine. It is all coming from Professor Abdul Halim's work. 3 ayat fuse the whole of Surah Al-Rehman into one solid unity. Ayat 1, Ayat 27, and Ayat 78 together help fuse this surah into one solid unity. Signification, that is the significance of these unifying ayat is that they pertain exclusively to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ayat 1, Ar-Rahman, the Merciful. Ayat 27, وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ لِرَبِّكَ وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ, right? ذِل جَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. All that remains is the face of your Lord, full of majesty, bestowing honor. All that remains is the face of your Lord. Allah's ayat again. Blessed is the name of your Lord, full of majesty, bestowing honor. Again, your Lord. 3 ayat in this surah exclusively pertain to his zat. Placement of 2 of these ayats, ayat 1 is clear to see. The first and the last ayat. Oh, yeah, I know. First ayat begins Allah's name. Last ayat ends with Allah's name. We saying, blessed. The placement of the third ayat, observe, all that remains is the face of your Lord, Zul Jalali wal Ikram, is most remarkable and so very appropriate, the placement of it. The Quran brings it towards the end of the first section. Remember ayat 1 through 30, towards the first section. Allah's blessings in this world, ayat 1 through 30. Having listed the context of this surah, i.e. the blessings of Ar-Rahman for men and jinn, lest these addresses, men and jinn, feel secure in their worldly blessings. Oh my God, these blessings are for me alone. Here comes the reminder that all is fani, perishable, and that وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ. Lest we puff up and say, my God, look at all the blessings I have. He reminds us before he goes to the punishment and reward sections, you are fani. We all are going to perish. And the only thing that will be left is his face, his countenance, his zat. Lest we forget this, lest we take these blessings for granted, he reminds here, before he goes into the consequences, before he goes into the aftermath, before he addresses the judgment day, he reminds you, yes, these are the blessings. This is what I'm giving you. But remember, it's perishable. Remember, this is only this earth. Remember, this is the limited time. Make the most of this time, because after that, وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ. This is what it is. Before moving to the discourse on the punishment of the deniers, 31 through 45, and the rewards of the believers, 46 through 77, this rejoinder of the Quran in 27 about all that remains is oneself provides the glue that, together with the first and the last ayat, fuses Surah Al-Rahman into one single unity. Isn't it remarkable?
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك اللهم لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت إنك يا ربنا تقضي بالحق ولا يقضى عليك. اللهم ادخلنا برحمتك في عبادك الصالحين. اللهم اخرجنا من ظلمات الجهل والوهم إلى نور العلم.
آمين.
اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم اجعلنا ممن يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. اللهم أوزعنا أن نشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علينا وعلى والدينا وأن نعمل صالحا ترضاه. اللهم اصلح لنا ذريتنا إنا تبنا إليك وإننا من المسلمين. Oh Allah, spread your mercy upon us, shower us with your blessings, increase our knowledge, grant us forgiveness,
آمين.
and reward us with the company of the prophets in the Firdaus al-A'la.
آمين.
Oh Allah, forgive our parents and all our friends and relatives who have passed away. Oh Allah, grant them your mercy. Make their graves garden from heaven and grant them the Firdaus al-A'la. Oh Allah, we have many of our friends and relatives who are sick. We have our son Ma'raj, our daughter Aisha Wani. Oh Allah, grant all of them full and speedy recovery.
آمين.
Oh Allah, we know that there is no cure but yours. Oh Allah, grant them a cure that leaves no ailment or injury.
آمين.
Oh Allah, guide our children, protect them and make them righteous. Oh Allah, grant us the power and the ability that we may be grateful for the favor that you have bestowed upon us and our parents, and that we may do righteous deeds that are pleasing to you. Oh Allah, we ask you in every name you have elected for yourself, that none of us leave this gathering, but his pains have been relieved, his worries have been removed, his debts have been paid, his weaknesses have been concealed, his sins have been forgiven, and his needs have been fulfilled. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.